Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Proms G webinar for June. Tonight, we're mind mapping our way to work breakdown structure project success with Liam Pettit from Matchware. In a moment, I'm going to pass you over to Liam to take you through his presentation. I just wanted to say that this is, you're all very welcome, firstly, and secondly, this is the last webinar for our 2019-20 series. So we're taking a couple of months break, and then we're going to come back with a really exciting new program for 2020-21. So do keep an eye on our Proms G website, where we will be adding new information shortly. So without further ado, I'll pass over to Liam to take us through this session.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for inviting me on today's webinar. It actually came about from Viba attending, I believe, Project Challenge, which is a project manager's show that we do annually, where we gave a similar presentation, and we're obviously invited to speak here. So, look, guys, thank you so much. I just want to get a quick test from everyone who's logged in, just to make sure that you can hear us loud and clear. There's like a hands up button on the GoToWebinar panel. If you can hear me, if you could just take a moment just to press that hands up button, and then great, yeah, loads of hands going up there. That's perfect. Thank you so much. Just to see that. And also, just before we get started talking about mind mapping and talking about how that's used within the project management, project planning context, I just wanted to understand as well from you guys how familiar you are with mind mapping techniques. Is it something that you're using, and what kind of tools you're using already for project planning? So I'm just going to launch a poll here, which if you could just take a quick second just to vote on that. You should see that on your screen in front of you now. And I'll share the results with everyone. It's always interesting to see. I think in the UK, when we do this presentation, it tends to be quite a high percentage of individuals have used mind mapping. They remember it with something they did in school, you know, preparing for exams, those sorts of things. Where in the US and still in other countries in Europe, it tends to be a different split. So this is quite interesting, actually. So we're seeing a larger split if you're not using mind mapping. So perhaps today I'll spend a little bit more time talking about, you know, the real techniques behind mind mapping before we actually get into a live example of that. So thank you for doing that. Let me just close that and share with you those results. So 29% of you say yes, you are currently utilizing mind mapping, and 71% of you aren't. I think what's quite interesting about those of you who don't, perhaps one of the reasons behind that, and certainly the thing that we get a lot of feedback on, is whilst you really enjoy the process of mind mapping, you often find it takes time to have to then replicate that information from scratch into other formats for other purposes. So certainly one of the things we'll look at today is how that can be eliminated by using a piece of software for mind mapping instead. So that's really useful. Thank you. And just the very last one I want to ask here is, what tools are you using for project planning? Just kind of get a litmus test of where you're at with various pieces of software. I've just labeled a few here from Excel, Microsoft Project. Perhaps you're already using some kind of mind mapping software. Excellent. Yeah, certainly. So just whilst you're completing that poll, someone's just in the questions panel of GoToWebinar raised a question. Just to let everyone know, please do ask questions as we go through today's session. It's not just for questions. If you want to make comments and I can repeat that back to the group, that's totally fine. I'll try and address most of those as we go through the session. I may leave some of them a little bit later because I know perhaps later on I'm going to address that question, but I'll do my best. Someone's just asking if we have any resources, books, websites for further reading, perhaps about mind mapping, especially for mind mapping for project purposes. Certainly, I can point you in the direction of lots of resources as we go through today's session. Just for everyone though, who I would recommend researching is a gentleman called Tony Buzan. He's accredited with modernizing a lot of the mind mapping techniques that we're using today. So yeah, if you do want to really get into the depths of the techniques behind mind mapping, there's certainly lots of materials on various Tony Buzan websites, and everyone tends to reference back to that. So Look, thanks for completing that poll again here. So let me just share that with you. And I think it's quite a common split that the majority of you are kind of saddled between using Excel and Microsoft Project. Obviously, both have pros and cons. Some of you perhaps jumping into the world of mind mapping software, so that's great. Perhaps we'll convert a few more of you from today's session, and then the rest of you perhaps using some other types of tools. But it's quite common when we're presenting to companies who are looking to formalize their project planning processes is they tend to be using Excel and deciding whether or not to make the jump between Microsoft Project or various other different tools. And so hopefully as we go through today's session, you'll find that mind mapping can slot in not only into those formalized PMOs, but also into perhaps less formalized, less mature project management offices that are using various different tools. So we're going to cover lots of bases today, but hopefully you all get something from that. Excellent. So just to introduce myself, like I was introduced, my name's Liam. I work for a company called Matchware. We are a software house. We actually produce a mind mapping software called Mindview, which I'll be using as the live demonstration today. But hopefully you'll be taking away lots of information about mind mapping techniques in general. So it's not just about our particular example. We've been developing software since 1992. We've got lots of various different packages. And whilst I talk about today's session being about mind mapping the work breakdown structure, it's actually a much more generalist approach to any type of project planning, perhaps decision making, report writing. So really the takeaways from today's session are going to be how we use mind mapping as an improved method of any type of planning. Be that when you're sat at the computer on your own and you're trying to articulate thoughts and ideas, to when you're running perhaps more larger stakeholder engagements where you want to capture ideas and visualize them within the group. We'll also be talking about productivity in a really big way. So how, especially when you combine mind mapping techniques with software, how you can transfer those ideas into Microsoft Office, including Microsoft Project, without having to replicate that information from scratch. And I'll give you some good examples of how clients are using that. We'll talk about obviously creating Gantt charts, but I think what's even more attractive is the ability to create more consolidated timelines. You're not always going to jump into those stakeholder sessions with a fully fledged Gantt chart because not everyone's going to benefit from reading that. So the timeline function is obviously something we'll look at. And also how mind maps at a very early stage can help you start to identify resource management, getting kind of high level budgeting and calculations before getting into a bit more of a in-depth project plan. Just realized I was actually showing the results there. So those learning objectives now up on the screen. Thanks guys for those of you who are telling me. Okay, so let's start at the very beginning. So we're all on the same page. What is a mind map? Ultimately, it's a structure of information, and we often refer to it as an organic or radial way of looking at information, starting with a central idea, a root or a theme, with information exploding outwards. And often we talk about how mind mapping is a great way of helping to improve things like memory recall, because just by using colors or images and short phrases, you can help recall information a lot quicker and get things into the long-term memory a lot better. But also we'll talk about how it appeals to both the right and the left brain thinkers, which is a great advantage when you're trying to engage large groups of stakeholders or clients or for whatever particular reason. Now, in the same way, a work breakdown structure is exactly the same thing, a structure of information. However, it's a more kind of top-down swim lanes of objectives, deliverables, work packages, tasks, etc. And we'll talk about how the hierarchy of a mind map really lends itself also to the hierarchy of a work plan as well as we go through today's training session. But as I mentioned before, especially when you link mind mapping with technology, certainly you'll see an increased productivity benefit, because a lot of the time when working with project managers, there's a huge amount of repetition when you're taking what is essentially the same data that you've captured at the sticky note session to transfer it to the Gantt chart, to transfer it to the report, to transfer it to the PowerPoint, and how tools like Mindview or mind mapping softwares in general just actually remove that repetition. We'll talk about how it improves communication, that kind of right brain, left brain thinking that I was talking about, improved memory recall, better method of organization, but also a reduced stress and anxiety. And we have a lot of experience in delivering mind mapping techniques to support actually mental health. And one of the things that mind mapping really helps to achieve is to get a big picture as well as the detail. And I'm sure you've all experienced it when perhaps you jump into a project halfway through, or even when you've been there from the very beginning and someone circulates the Gantt chart and you're looking at this thing and you're trying to think, oh, God, how can I really fully understand what's happening in here? And obviously the stress of having to try read that can be quite significant. So by transferring that information or seeing it in a mind map, you kind of get that penny drop moment, and you're able to see that big picture, see the relationships between information a lot more coherently, and then obviously that improves any type of planning. So those are the real kind of key takeaways. But as well as project management and project planning, organizations will formalize lots of different processes. And my recommendation when approaching any organization who's taking on this technique and taking on this type of software is, because it can achieve so much, you've always got to be cautious that then it ultimately gets used for nothing, which is obviously a great shame. You've probably all seen various different software packages be introduced to the company and then it doesn't get used. So when implementing it, you want to look at formalizing one very specific process. And we get a lot of clients who will focus on the work breakdown structure process of the project planning with Mindview first. And then once that becomes mastered, it then organically gets used for other things more frequently. So as you're going through this, really think about, okay, what can be the one thing that my team uses it for? Is it that sticky note session? Is it for creating the task list, the work breakdown structure dictionary, or just producing a better Gantt chart? So loads of different ways to use it. Start to think about those different formalized ways. Now, if you're interested to know if your organization already has Mindview on its estate, then that's something you can ask of us. For a number of different reasons, Mindview is in most organizations, either as a project management tool, a productivity tool, but is also adopted, if you're familiar, as a reasonable adjustment to support individuals with mental health conditions, disabilities, learning difficulties, those sorts of things. But one also massive driver into businesses is that now over 75% of all UK universities have it for every single student. So lecturers are using it, study skills tutors, student services, and students themselves. And so obviously they're then going into the workplace and wanting to continue using this type of methodology. But if you're interested to know whether or not your organization has it, I'll give you my details at the end of this, and you can certainly request from us if that's something you're interested to find out. Okay, so I haven't made a mistake here. That this next slide is designed to be blank. And what we're going to do together is let's call it a little scientific experiment, because perhaps some of you are still thinking about why would we want mind mapping as a methodology within our organization? And hopefully I'm going to achieve the reason why with these next few slides. So we're going to do this test, and the next slide that I show you will have the numbers 1 through to 35 just scattered all over the screen. And your objective is to count those numbers in sequence. So find 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, then 5, and so on and so forth until you get to 35. And I'm going to actually give you 10 seconds to get from 1 to 35. Okay, and we'll see how you guys get on. So let's start this in 3, 2, 1. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so in the questions panel of GoToWebinar, I'm always interested to know who made it to 35. If you didn't make it to 35, just type in your number. What did you get to? Let's figure this out. So John 4, Sally 5, Holly 5, Alec 4. So 4s and 5s. We've got a 7 from Lawrence. Excellent. Paul in the lead with 12 at the moment. Tim 4, Magdalena 5. No, I can't keep up with all the names, but I'm doing my best. Nigel 6, Eva 3, 15. Excellent. So majority of you hovering around that 4, 5, 6 mark, which is kind of what I would expect. But numbers aside, just kind of reflect for a moment as to how that exercise felt, and notice how perhaps some of your strategies came to the surface. Perhaps you found yourself sitting forward in your chair a little bit. Maybe your head started to move around the screen. Maybe you were verbalizing what number was coming next. And these are all kind of strategies that your natural instinct will start to produce when you're put into a position of kind of stress and anxiety. And the head moving is a famous one, because you want to demonstrate to the world, I'm working hard, but I'm making no progress. The verbalization is someone help me find this next one. So, and that's just with random numbers across the screen. I didn't really achieve, it's not, no value to it, nothing important. So imagine how that stress and perhaps anxiety might have felt if that was actually something of value and you were time limited on that information. But let's have a look at these numbers again. And what I'm going to do is just apply a simple structure to these numbers, okay? And guide you to start at the top left-hand corner and work your way right. And you'll notice that behind this, all along, there's been a sequence. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And all of a sudden, perhaps you're feeling that moment, that kind of penny drop moment, where all of a sudden your mind is able to see this information, digest it, move through the numbers quicker, perhaps even remember the pattern, so you can remember where numbers are if I was to take those numbers away. But ultimately, it's that kind of shoulder drop moment where the stress and anxiety is kind of taken away from it. And I know this is a very, very crude experiment, but that's the feeling that you get when you do see information, especially for visual thinkers and organic thinkers, when you see information in a mind map, because you're able to see that big picture as well as focus in on specific detail. You can see relationships between information, you can see hierarchy, and those kind of images help to remember information or just make the mind map a bit more presentable, a bit more engaging. But whilst it's great to have this mind map, ultimately the limitation of any type of report writing or project planning or any type of writing, extended writing, is you need to produce information in something that looks a little bit like this. And again, for those people who prefer to see the mind map, when you've got long documents in linear formats, you start to find individuals, find it difficult to remember where things are. They have to go through those documents again and again to find the right place. And that's with quite a nice list. Here, you're going to the bottom, you're going back to the top again to remember what's in there. So really what we're unlocking with mind mapping techniques is that innovation of being able to generate ideas in a visual way using mind mapping, which we know is a better method of just generating ideas, organizing them, and creating a hierarchy and sequence of information. And then at a click of a button, being able to transfer it into any Office document in Microsoft Office, as well as some built-in views that we have in Mindview, like a timeline, Gantt chart, outline view, and other such project reports. And this is where, when you're really looking at organic versus linear, we often see that the biggest breakdown in teams is a result of communication. You've spent a whole week putting together this amazing document in a lovely linear format. You've sent it out to everyone, and you're gobsmacked why people haven't read it. And a lot of the time, maybe it is, you think it's just due to the fact that people they're too lazy to read it, or it's an oversight or whatever, and you find yourself repeating the same information, and you get halfway through a project and, well, I said that at the start, whatever it might be. And quite a lot of the time, it's down to the fact that working in an organization with lots of different types of thinkers, not everyone's going to remember and digest that information, perhaps the format that you presented it. So this is another method by which you can present and distribute information that will help to get it to stick, help to improve communication, and break and overcome some of that communication breakdown, which, as we know, the consequence of that in project planning, project delivery, is if you've got different expectations, people go away and do different work, inaccurate requirements gathering. We'll talk about how mind mapping at that very beginning stage is a great way of getting everyone's ideas and requirements down first time right every time. But the worst is project failure. And of course, that's something we want to try and avoid. And this is hopefully a tool that's going to reduce the risk of project failure. Okay, I'm going to point you in the direction of lots of resources as we go through this, but I think some of the best places to go, of course, we've got our website, and I've wanted just to highlight one here in particular at matchware.com is a case study from McKesson. I chose them in particular because it's obviously an IT project-driven environment, how they used mind mapping for lots of different sized projects, but also Suez in particular talk about how the work breakdown structure process has been formalized through the use of mind mapping. So I'll send these links to you. Perhaps I can copy paste these links into the chat sections towards the end, and I'll try address those as much as possible. But to be honest, what I want to do now is jump into Mindview and give you a bit of a live example and story of how mind mapping is used to then improve that sticky note session into project planning, project delivery, and then stakeholder engagement. As I mentioned, if anyone's got any questions, please just dump it into the questions panel. I'll try address those as much as possible. I can see there's one question here, is there a free version to check out Mindview? Yes, there is. In fact, let me just put that up here now, just in case anyone needs to jump off. I'm just going to put it into the chat section for everyone. So if you want to jump on here and download Mindview, you can have a play with it for free for 30 days. That's entirely up to you guys. Okay, so look, I'm jumping into Mindview here, and the first thing that you should really notice is, and you'll see it throughout the software, is that we have designed the tool to look and feel exactly like Microsoft Office. In fact, we're Microsoft Gold partners, so we're kind of locked in, kind of tenured to be able to use their interface. They've actually stopped doing that with new companies now, so that kind of gives us an advantage over any new products that come onto the market. But like anything, when you're implementing a new piece of software into the company, there's always going to be a learning curve, and that learning curve is typically dictated by two things. One is the kind of functionality of the tool, and the other one is the interface. So by the fact that we've gone down this route of making the tool look identical to Microsoft Office, it kind of helps to speed up that learning curve, because you're no longer having to worry about people accessing the tool. It's very intuitive for people who have been using Microsoft, all their career. And when it comes to learning the functionality, there's plenty of webinars with us you can jump onto, as well as video tutorials. But we kind of started life just as a visual planning tool, a great way to do any type of brainstorming. And as the program developed, we found that the largest cohort of users that we had were project managers. So we really went down this route of putting specific functionality into the tool that's aimed at project planning and project delivery. So the ability to change your mind map into the work breakdown structure at a click of a button, as well as into the project Gantt chart. And we'll talk about that in a bit more detail in just a minute. And then the last thing we've really done with the tool is focus on this productivity. So the ability to convert your mind map into any Office document, including Microsoft Project. So I'm just going to start with a new mind map here. I've just got a couple of questions. Let's jump into this here. If some people are asking about integrations, so whilst we don't have a direct integration with everything, things like when we're talking, especially some of our larger clients like Primavera, 6 and things like this, all of the good project management tools have an XML integration. So Mindview, you can import, export with Project XML, or you can code your own XML if you really want to go down that rabbit hole. And I wouldn't call any other tool that doesn't have an XML integration a true kind of project tool. So that's really something to look out for, I guess, when you're looking at any suite of project tools, is do they have that XML integration, which allows you to interact with all those different areas. So that's the one thing I definitely look out for. So kind of following that theme of the project look and feel, the office look and feel, we've got this ribbon toolbar across the top. And you know, I want you to just all imagine that we're the start of the planning phase of a new project, you know, but instead of the sticky notes, instead of the whiteboards, we're going to project Mindview up, and we're going to use Mindview as our kind of visual planning tool. And let's just do something quite generic here. We're going to start with a product launch, okay? Product launch. So loads of different ways to generate ideas on the screen. You know, the insert key just generates a new level of detail. And we'll say, okay, we've got product, marketing, enter to create a branch at the same level. And let's do planning and sales, okay? Setup team, create budget, okay? So really quickly, you can just kind of branch those ideas out, and they kind of start to sprout out in this nice kind of organic structure of that mind map, you know, the central idea of the information exploding outwards. One thing that's really important, though, to understand about how to read this mind map is that, you know, just like that slide that had the random numbers just all over the screen, the mind map in Mindview also has a sequence in the background. So the best way to display that, if I just turn on the numbering scheme here, you'll notice that we actually read the mind map in a clockwise fashion. So starting at number 1 on the clock face, we read those ideas around the center, and it even sub numbers those outer branches for us as well. So that's great because, of course, we can then look at this and go, well, of course, you know, product isn't the first thing we're going to do in this project. Let's think about planning first. So I can move that up there, and the numbering sequence just adapts for us automatically. So the whole tool is kind of built on this drag and drop, and you can move things around, sub branches, main branches, etc. So I think what's really nice about that is, especially when you've got lots of ideas on the mind map, it becomes quite easy to move big chunks of information without having to, you know, move loads of post-its around and all those good things. But the other reason why this is a really important thing to pick up on is like this numbering sequence in the mind map it's like the backbone of the software. Because as I mentioned, the innovation of mind mapping tools is this ability to replicate the same information in all these different formats and in these different styles and layouts. So it uses this sequence of information to generate those other formats. So for example, when you export to Word, planning is going to be your first header, product your second header, or planning is your first PowerPoint slide, or even when you go to Microsoft Project, planning is your first deliverable, product your second deliverable, and then your first task or work package, subtask, those sorts of things. So it's a really important kind of takeaway from how to read that mind map. Just to kind of speed things up here a little bit, I'm just going to fast forward into a template. And what I would say is templates are a really good way of, again, formalizing your processes in your business. So if you've got a set way of approaching a new project, or a project that you repeat in the same way, you can just save that as a template, open it up, and then set your planning start dates or project start dates or project delivery end date, and you don't have to replicate all that information from scratch. There's actually loads of tools. I think there's about kind of over 200 different templates in here to kind of get your teeth into. So loads of different things to kind of see the example of here. But I'm just going to go to one template that I made here. So fast forwarding, expanding that idea of our product launch, we've just kind of got the exact same project here, 4 main deliverables. And as you can see, we just highlighted a few tasks, work packages in here. And as I mentioned before, now we want to just perhaps transfer this or flip this mind map into our work breakdown structure. So we've got this mind map view, left to right, right to left. We've got an org chart view, but if I go all the way to the right here, you can see how quickly it can flip those ideas into those swim lanes of activities as the work breakdown structure. And one thing we'll talk about with Mindview is that it actually applies those project rules onto the work breakdown structure as well. So such as aggregating your durations, your costs, to help define those summary tasks and those deliverables in an automated fashion. But as I mentioned, mind mapping has a kind of very robust theory behind it. So I'm just going to kind of continue to operate in this mind map view now, because it's just, you know, particular preference. Now, one of the things that I often see a kind of pitfall when people start using mind mapping is they'll be really tempted to put lots of text and full sentences and full descriptions on each of these branches. And what the technique of mind mapping actually teaches us is you really want to limit the branch to have maybe just a couple words or a couple keywords, because it's not designed to give you all the information at that branch, but to kind of trigger you to remember that information or to kind of inquire on that branch in a bit more detail. So if you do want to get, though, into a bit more detail, that's where adding things on a text note editor is going to be more appropriate. So you can apply basically onto all of these branches, multiple text notes. You can put images, attachments, links, and really turn your mind map into a hub of content. But back to that planning stage where you're all kind of generating ideas together, perhaps the end user or the client or the stakeholders have actually started to define those tasks in a bit more detail. And I want to capture that on the mind map itself. So just by opening up the text note editor here, I can start to embed a bit more detail onto this branch. So, and you'll notice again, the ribbon toolbar, it's changed all that Microsoft Word formatting. So you've got all that ability to format directly in the mind map. So we want to hire a new sales manager, hire sales team, and we're going to keep the sales team happy by a coffee machine. Okay. So just close that, you'll see a paperclip appears on the branch, hover over it, and you can see exactly what's embedded on here. But it really becomes a one-stop shop for all of your project assets. So, for example, if people are contributing documents, maybe working documents or whatever it might be, you can actually embed that all into one place. So I talked about at the beginning how mind mapping becomes this better method of organization, because again, instead of having kind of all these folder structures or for multiple projects, trying to manage all the multiple assets in multiple places, you've just got one mind map where you're actually delivering the project. And as you can see here, I've just added an Excel spreadsheet. There's that Excel spreadsheet icon, and that will now launch in the native format of that file, and you can launch it directly. So, you can imagine, you're in that presentation, you want to access that document straight away. You don't have to go searching for it or prepare it in any great detail. It's there when you need it, which is quite cool. Question here, it's quite a good one. Can we use this on Google Docs? So that raises 2 points. One, yes, if you wanted to just embed documents from your SharePoint, Google Drive, OneDrive, you can put them as links to those documents on your mind map. I think that's quite useful because, of course, if those documents are continuing to be edited, you don't have to always constantly re-upload the latest version of that document onto your mind map. Plus, it also has the added advantage of being a bit more secure because, of course, if you don't have access to that document, you're not going to be able to open it in the mind map either. But of course, it does have a bit of a con. If you're sharing your mind map, then those links are pathways. So if those documents move, for whatever reasons, those pathways will be broken, whereas you can actually embed things into the mind map. The other question that raises is, I keep talking about exporting into Word, into PowerPoint. Well, in fact, what I mean by that is exporting into a docx format or a pptx format. So whilst we don't have an icon that says export into Word, you can just save that file. You don't need Microsoft Office for these documents to be created. That's kind of like a unique feature of Mindview. And then you can just open it in Google Docs instead of Microsoft. So yeah, it kind of works in that same way. But I see a lot of people using Mindview as a presentation tool as well. That has a lot of advantages. One, everyone knows where your presentation is going to begin and where it's going to end. You compare that to projects, PowerPoint slides. You're always thinking, oh, geez, is this the last slide? Is this the last slide? Well, with a mind map, you've got that advantage of saying, this is the big picture. This is what we're going to talk about. Go into the detail and then summarize by looking at that big picture again. So one thing people like to do is embed images onto the mind map, kind of make it look a little bit more interesting. And in this example, I've got a image of our product, which I can just embed onto the branch. It makes a nice kind of thumbnail sized image on the mind map as well, so it never really takes your mind map. Okay. So I'm just going to review any questions here. If anyone's got any questions about just that kind of generating ideas with the mind map. One question comes up quite frequently. It is possible to create ideas that aren't connected to your mind map. So let's say, for example, you've got an idea, you don't know where it belongs yet. just double click into the background, iPad tech, I don't know. And then later on, when you figure out where you want it to go, you can just drag and drop and put it onto the mind map, and it just fits into place kind of perfectly just there. Cool. Okay, so again, we're back in that planning phase, and we're kind of getting to the end of that meeting with the stakeholder. And perhaps it's someone's job to summarize the meeting minutes, or to come up with a kind of summary of what's been discussed and what's been agreed. And again, that's a manual process. So this is where we really see this kind of mind mapping strategy turn into a productivity strategy. So let's begin by looking at the export over to Microsoft Word. Okay, so I always suggest choosing the custom Word export, simply because in the software itself, there's loads of different templates that are going to make the work and look really slick, really professional, really well structured. But you can also choose your organization's template. So if you've already defined your your docx template, when you export, choose that template and actually put it onto your company header, footer, right company font, colors, all those good things. But I'm just going to choose this one up here, and you can even pick and choose exactly what's going to come across into this document. So you can even choose putting some kind of project information onto those items as well. But I'm just going to leave that blank for now. But by exporting it out now, I'm just saving this to my computer, and Mindview is now going to work again with Microsoft Word to take those ideas of the mind map, that structure, that sequence of the mind map, and convert it into this linear formatted document. Okay. So let's have a look at what's happened here. So first and foremost, we've got the image of the mind map. Now, whichever image you were on, if it was that work breakdown structure view or the timeline view, Gantt chart view, that will be at the top of the document, but it's just an image, so you can delete it. But I like to leave it in here because it shows how the structure of the mind map formats the Word document. So you can see the main branches convert into main chapter titles, those sub branches as sub chapters, and it creates that table of contents for us with page numbers automatically. And that's actually built into Word. So if you click on planning, for example, it takes you down to that section. But basically, whatever content you've put onto these branches forms the body of the text. You've got the attachment from the mind map is actually now embedded within the Word document as well. So again, instead of having lots of different appendices, you can just double click and it opens that document. It's actually truly embedded into that Word document. And we've got that image here as well. Now, I haven't got a lot of information here, but if you inference and take this one step further, you can see how perhaps that mind map was used to structure a really well outlined document, be it perhaps a legal document, an ISO framework, policy document, request for proposals, put all your legal jargon, all the text onto those branches, and then when you're exporting it to Word, you're not having to do all that formatting from scratch. Things aren't in the right order, well, just go back to your mind map, move things around, export it again. But what's really important with these tools is that the integration is a two-way street. So in fact, you can take this document, add more content to it, save it, import it back into Mindview, and it'll actually generate a whole new mind map with all those new content pieces already in there. So that works in the same way with like Microsoft Project. So if you've got an existing project file, import that back into Mindview, and it will create the mind map from scratch, the work breakdown structure, the Gantt chart, the timeline, and then you can use it as like productivity tool to then create your Word documents, your PowerPoints, and things like that. So I'm just jumping into a question here. So when you forward the Word doc, oh yeah, so that document here, this attachment, if I was to forward this Word document to someone now, that would also open for them because that's embedded as a true attachment within this Word document. That only works with Office documents. That's just one of the limitations of Microsoft Word. If I attached a PDF or if I attached a Google Doc or things like that, it would just be a link. And that link would obviously be to wherever that document is saved. So just be mindful of that. Cool. Okay. So again, taking this one step further, perhaps your method of communication, I see this quite a lot in even really well-established PMOs, is death by PowerPoint. That's how they like to communicate project updates, project delivery. So how can we use that with Mindview? So again, it's the same thing, and this is, it's not a great big secret here. What we're doing, it's the same data. We're just taking it and transferring it into different formats for different purposes. And again, we've got loads of different types of disgusting looking slide decks here, but you can choose your company template or put it onto that template for you. And it just helps to speed up that process of producing what is that same information in multiple different ways. So again, here's that PowerPoint slide. The first slide introduces us to the 4 main deliverables and just takes us around each of those slides. I've not built like the most engaging presentation here. I haven't got much content on my branches, but it gives you an insight into how it's perhaps easier to storyboard that presentation in the mind map and then push it out to PowerPoint and start adding or collating more content on those PowerPoint slides out there. Okay, cool. So I'm just going to field again. So I keep stopping, just trying to address as many questions as I can as we go through this. Yeah, so yeah, that's exactly right. So if you've got existing documents, say in Word or in PowerPoint, and they haven't been in Mindview in the first place, yes, you can import them into Mindview. What Mindview is going to do is read that document and try and make a mind map based off that information. So either it will use the headers to help structure the branches, and then anything under the headers will be the content, or it will look for an indentation or look for a numbering scheme to help structure the mind map. So you can do that with Excel documents as well. So if you want to try and import those documents, instead of having to take all the templates that you've already got and write them from scratch, you can just do that import. John, yes, I believe this presentation is actually being recorded. So if you wanted to get hold of this, I think it's going to be published on YouTube but by the Institute at a later stage. Okay, so we got to the end of the, actually, before I jump into that, so let me just talk about how, when thinking about scheduling and planning, I'm just going to open up this task and timeline tool here on the right-hand side, just to talk about a few things. So the first thing you'll notice in this panel is that the document type is set to project management. That basically means we integrate with Microsoft Project really well and also apply the proper project rules to the mind map. So the two rules that you need to be aware of are, one is that we will turn these main headers here, the main deliverables, into summary tasks. So a summary task is an aggregation of the branches beneath it. So it's actually going to roll up all of the data to define those main deliverables for us in an automated fashion. And the second rule is that as a default, we apply a project calendar. Now, as a default, our project calendar is a 5-day working week, and that's a 40-hour week, Monday through Friday, but you can really get into customizing your project calendars, even manage all of your resource calendars as well in Mindview. But as you can see here, if I was just to jump into one task here, I can update the duration, start, end date, priority, completion, and Mindview also has a resource management tool built into it as well. So if you really want to get into, rates per resource, effort-driven task, resource calendars, if you want to really go down that rabbit hole, Mindview can handle all of that. And in fact, you can manage that with your Active Directory or even your address book. If you're managing your calendars externally, you can synchronize that with your project file with Mindview very, very easily. But the one thing I've seen time and time again when doing trainings within organizations is, you get to the end of that sticky note session, and what typically happens is everyone whips out their camera phones and starts to take photos of the mind map or the sticky notes on the screen. They go back to their desk and everyone makes their own versions or their own Gantt charts, and depending on the size of that session, that can be a pretty long task. So really all we have to do with Mindview is change that view. We've got a kind of our own built-in fully functional Gantt chart built on the principles of Microsoft Project. So all you have to do is click of a button, will automatically transfer all that information into the Gantt chart for you already. Now, I'm working off a template here, so I've already kind of defined a lot of my dependencies, constraints, and planning information. But if I was just to go back to that mind map that we created together at the start here, just to show you what happens, let's change that view to the Gantt chart. As you can see, it just takes all that information, the hierarchy of the mind map. And then what's nice about the Gantt chart in Mindview is we kind of refer to it as like the lighter, more intuitive version of Microsoft Project, because you can just drag and drop durations, constraints, drag and drop predecessors, even drag and drop things like your progression and things like that. Now, a couple of things that jump off the page here when people aren't familiar with Mindview, but they really like remember Microsoft Project, is a lot of people like to see the task name or the resource name actually on the duration bar itself. So that's actually just a very simple design element. We decided to not have that as a default, but you can just simply turn that on and have that displayed here on the Gantt chart. But on the left-hand side is that typical outline view with all that data, and then represented on the right, all the Gantt chart information, calendar across the top, and all that information in here. In fact, Mindview can handle, quite large, medium-sized projects, I'd say. Microsoft Project is really a tool for scale. So if you're looking at developing a project that's going to deliver, the Shard or the London Bridge, then of course those tools are designed for scale. Everything else, Mindview is more than capable of handling that. It's kind of got a lot of the functionality of Microsoft Project, from being able to define tasks as milestones, effort-driven tasks, different constraint types. It's kind of all in there, as well as you can do your baselining here in Mindview as well. So I'm just going to jump into a question here. So one of the questions that's coming out here is, can you assign the workload out to teams and set deadlines for completion? So when it all comes down to the task management of Mindview, there's a number of ways that you can do that. In Mindview itself, we've got our own kind of task management tool that allows you to distribute the tasks out to individuals through a web browser. They can update the progress of those projects, and that will be synchronized back to the mind map. Alternatively, you can export this out to your Outlook task list. And of course, you become the task owner, but those tasks will be sent out to all of those tasks. People have to update those tasks. You can also customize emails out to those people. And then you can synchronize back and forth your Outlook task list to your Microsoft, to this project file as well. But a lot of you are kind of an equal split between those of you who use Excel and those of you who use Microsoft Project. Perhaps those of you who use Microsoft Project are thinking, okay, so how does Microsoft Project fall into this? Because that's our standardized tool. Well, at any point, you can export into Microsoft Project and import from Microsoft Project. What makes the integration with Project unique with Mindview is that nothing is lost in the transfer. So if you've defined your calendars, your resources, and all of your project scheduling constraints, dependencies, etc., either in Project or in Mindview, when you move them back and forth, no matter where you've made the edits, all of that information comes across. So what we typically see is Microsoft Project users will use Mindview as like the front end planning tool to improve that planning phase, and then the back-end productivity tool with Microsoft Project sandwiched somewhere in the middle. Okay. Yeah, Christina, this presentation is being recorded, so I think you'll actually be able to watch it back later. And I'm going to give you all my email at the end of this. Perhaps actually I can send it to all of you now anyway, just in case any of you drop off for any reason. This is my email if you want to reach out to get some more information. That's totally fine. Cool. So again, following the narrative of the project planning phase, we're now kind of into the more scheduling and actually into the delivery of this project. I want to talk about how we then use this tool to help engage our stakeholders. Because as I mentioned before, you're not going to always run into a meeting and open up a Gantt chart with 200 lines of tasks, because it's not always going to capture the imagination of the people that you work with, because not everyone is trained on how to understand a Gantt chart. So what our users like to do is transfer this information into a few other formats. So the first bit of functionality that's really, really popular is the built-in timeline. So again, it's the same data, we're just displaying it in a slightly different format. And what the timeline is a kind of consolidated linear timeline with all of these project items displayed in that linear format. And there's loads of different formatting ways where you can change the design of this, perhaps even bring across the duration bars as well. It's a really nice way of creating a kind of one-stop visual show of perhaps a timeline of just your milestones or the whole project itself. But I'm displaying to you in this particular example quite a small project, I suppose. Your projects are going to be much more significant than this. So what are some tricks and tips around how to display and use and manage these large projects? So one thing to look out for is built into the tool are lots of filters. So as you're actually adding project information, it will add that into your project filters. So let's say, for example, you just wanted to create a timeline based on a resource, and perhaps a resource is one particular department or perhaps an individual. You can just jump into that, create a timeline or one single mind map just based on that particular resource. So again, you're not having to reinvent the wheel every time you go into a meeting with a stakeholder. You're just perhaps filtering out that relevant information, displaying it then in a way that helps you present that information as well as get into the real detail of that information as well. Okay. But another way that our project managers like to use Mindview is to export over to project reports. So again, even if you're a Microsoft project user and you want to create some project reports for your end users, the project reports are really nice for this. So again, it's just another export, and we're exporting it over to project reports. I'm going to bring everything across, but you can choose which elements of your project information you'd like to bring across. So, you've got choice of Kanban reports, baseline reports, resource, task lists, etc., etc. I'm just going to bring everything across so you can see the full potential of it. But basically, these reports are displayed in an HTML format, which again, it means you can share it with anyone. They don't need the software to open this, and there's no formatting issues. It opens in any browser. It also allows us to show this information in a little bit more of a compelling way. On the left-hand side are all of the project report options. I'm just in the executive summary right now, so you can see an overview of the project calendars, task status, summary of the tasks, etc., etc. But let's get into a bit more detail here. So I'm just going to jump into the task status, and we decided to demonstrate this information by first of all showing the main deliverables first. So you get a nice overview of each deliverable, what's unstarted, in progress, and completed. And then you can just cycle through each of these main deliverables and see a summary of that information beneath. But if you've really kind of gone into managing your resource information, getting to your project calendars, those effort-driven tasks, then you can start to see an allocation of that workload. So some people choose, one mind map can be one project, but you can also use one mind map as your program. So instead of the main branches just being each deliverable, each main branch is now an individual project itself. And you can consolidate that all into one big mind map and then see that allocation of resource across the whole program. And what we've done is created an index, based on hours available, hours required, and the calendar of each resource. You can, in a nice visual way, see over allocation and allocation of resources, and even compare that to the overdue tasks in your project. So this is kind of like an obvious example here. You go, hey, Bob, you're the least allocated in this project, but you're the one who's our kind of bottleneck here because we've got quite a lot of overdue tasks with you here. But look, I'm not going to go into a huge amount of detail on these because the data isn't your data, I suppose. So when it becomes your data, it becomes much more relevant. But you can see within Mindview, we've created some baselines. I haven't shown any deviation here, but if you wanted to see deviation based on duration, costs, work, right down to the individual resources themselves, you can really see where things are costing you more money or where you're saving money, where you're ahead, where you're behind, and be able to communicate that in a kind of quick snapshot way. But as I'd say to anyone, this is only as good as the data that you've put in. So don't expect this to obviously do the work for you. It's just a kind of nice snapshot of that information that you've been compiling and working on as you go through your project delivery, okay? Okay, so last couple things here. I just want to, again, talk about how you're handling really large maps in Mindview, because this can be quite significant, especially when you get to really large mind maps. People often find that the mind map loses the quality of that one quick snapshot. So just jumping into another template here, I'm expanding this project a little bit further, and I'm going into a much larger version of this. So as you can see, the project is much more well-defined. We've got many more tasks in here. If I go to the mind map, you'll see as well the mind map is much more significant. So a couple of kind of tricks and tips here about how to read this mind map. The first thing you can do is just change the detail level. So if you just want to see a quick overview of those main deliverables and the main work packages and tasks, just shrink it down to detail level number 2, and it shows you this more consolidated view here as well. But as well as that, we've got some nice tools that help you to prepare for those meetings that require you to focus on specific information, or help you to manage information a little bit better. So the first is we've got a built-in legend. So a legend is like having a key for your mind map. So you can allocate across the mind map lots of different icons, perhaps allocate different sprints, as well as different colors, and then you can label those as within your legend, which basically allows you to either highlight that information within the mind map itself to be able to visualize where that information is. So perhaps you're preparing for that Monday morning stakeholder meeting, and you just want to bring up, okay, those red flag items. You know, put some red flags across the mind map. It's really simple. Just highlight those branches and paste on those red flags, and then you can highlight them, as well as then filter that information. One of the advantages of the filter is that filter will then apply across all of the different views in Mindview. So if you go into the Gantt chart, or if you go into the timeline, that filter will still be applied. But also when you export, so if you export to Word, to PowerPoint, to Excel, whatever it might be, it will only export that subsection of information that you've decided to filter on, which I think is really, really powerful. You don't have to sift through that information in your mind map. But last but not least, in our smart navigation tools, it allows you to even search for information. So if I just start typing the word plan here, oops, it will search across all of those items in the mind map. Let me just turn off this, bear with me a second, turn off this highlight here. So plan, it will highlight it in the mind map, and then if I click on it, it even takes me to that branch. So loads of different tools that help you to manipulate the mind map, focus on it. So if you're thinking in the back of your mind, well, I really manage much larger scale information, this again is a nice way of being able to filter and focus on specific information without having to replicate it all from scratch again and again and again, which I think is super, super powerful. So I'm just going to jump into some questions here. Okay, so these are really good questions. So Olivia is saying, how does Mindview compare with Vizio? Vizio is the Microsoft's version of creating a visual plan tool. What Vizio doesn't have is the ability to then transfer all that information into other formats like Word and PowerPoint, simply because it doesn't have the hierarchy that the Mindview mind map has. It's literally just a visual representation of information. It does have its place though when you're creating flow charts, because we don't have that functionality in Mindview, because we want to keep the integrity of that hierarchy of the mind map to enable us to integrate with other formats. And of course, flow charts don't have a hierarchy. It's a sequence of information, much more less hierarchical. So Vizio does have its place, but when it comes to project planning, creating Gantt charts, or project scheduling, and this productivity element, that's really where Vizio falls over. Is Mindview available as a fully scalable SaaS product? Yeah, so it is, in the sense that, of course, Mindview is a desktop tool for the PC and the Mac version. We do have an online version of the tool as well, which is again a bit more of a lighter tool. It doesn't have a lot of the project functionality. But it all comes down to how companies will take Mindview on into the organization. Typically what happens is a small project team will take it on maybe for 5 to 15 users. And in that case, you would just do it as an individual license key for each user, and you didn't download it individually. Once it becomes more established in an organization, it tends to then be rolled out more over a network. So Mindview can be installed on a network with a license key with a unlimited activation, which can then allow for you just to rock up to any device and access it. There is development in the pipeline whereby that's going to be taken one step further with handling a matchware account-based system. So it comes more driven by an email and password and allows you as an organization to have more control. So yes, that is something that's going to be introduced very soon. John's just asking a little bit about price of the tool here. Yes, Thierry, yes, it's a client server solution. If you want that full functionality, you would install it over that network on your server. John, so that pricing, you can go online and buy a single license for yourself. It's £279 plus VAT for a single license. And currently we're still operating a perpetual model. So you buy that license, you buy that version, Mindview 7. You can then get multiple user discounts, as well as if you're interested in a quotation for discounts for charities, for education, or for government. We offer discounts there as well. But we also offer a more subscription-based model, which is an annual fee based on the number of total employees in the organization. We focus on, okay, who's this really going to target? And then we've got banding pricing for that. And then that annual subscription entitles you to continuous upgrades to the software, access to all the versions, unlimited access on all devices, and training included in that as well. Look, guys, I'm just really conscious of time here, so I think I don't really want to go into too much more detail here. I've had one question where can we just have a quick look at how this integrates with Microsoft Excel? I'm going to just kind of say that's probably the last thing that we'll look at, and then I'll point you in the direction of more resources and information that you guys can look at. But one thing that we get a lot is how can Mindview be used as a way of kind of doing like a high-level budgeting, and how can that work with Excel? And one bit of functionality that we have in this tool here is this calculation functionality. It's a bit like having an Excel spreadsheet built into Mindview. So as you'll notice, when we go to the Gantt chart of Mindview, we've got lots of fields of data already built into the tool. So what happens if you've got a customized field that you want to insert into your project? Well, you'd handle it in this calculation module, and there's no limit to how what you want to label and the values of this information. So let's say, for example, we're just doing a very high level budget. So we want to work out maybe a cost per day, the number of days, and a total. And I also want to perhaps keep a bit of a risk register in here as well. So within here now, we can start to create either on the individual branch itself a formula, or I can use the default to put this formula across the whole of the mind map. So for example, in my total, I want that to be the cost per day times by the number of days. I want that to be in I got bear me a second. So the cost per day times by the number of days. Cool. I want this to be in pounds and pence for now, and the cost per day in pounds and pence as well. So I'm just putting these defaults across the whole of the mind map. Click OK. And then I'm just going around the mind map here. Okay, that's going to be £300 per day and an estimation of 3 days work. And can you see if I zoom in on this element of the mind map just here, it's starting to put that information directly under the branch for us. So we can just go around the mind map, adding this information onto here. Again, another £300, 400 for 4 days, etc., etc. And because the hierarchy of the mind map really lends itself to kind of rolling up or aggregating information, I can now just start to, in the total column here, summarize this information. So you can actually handle some math and trigonometry formulas if you want to. I'm really not going to get into that now. But you can see here, I'm just summarizing the information up the main branches, and it just makes it a simplified way of being able to, at a very high level, start to perhaps do some budgeting or risk management or whatever you might want to do. And then within the Gantt chart or in the outline view itself, you can then add those custom columns at a click of a button onto your Gantt chart as well. So you can handle all this data in multiple different ways and even add that custom information. But last but not least, let's export this into Excel. Budgeting folk, they love to see this information in an Excel spreadsheet. Same principle, loads of templates to choose from to make it look really well presentable. And you can really pick and choose what information you want to bring across. So let's bring some project information, completion priority resources. I want a legend with all the data of my project, of my resources, and all that custom information as well. Budget file, export it out. And again, at the click of a button, you haven't had to reproduce this information from scratch. You've now got a really well presented Excel spreadsheet, which does a number of different things. One, it keeps the hierarchy of the mind map as a collapsible function on the left-hand side. So I think that's really slick. Again, if you've got really large Excel spreadsheets, you know what it's like to try group information. That can be really painful. But also on those calculations that we had in the mind map, it's brought it across as actually a working formula in this Excel spreadsheet. So again, if you want to edit the information here, customize it or import it back into Mindview, you can do that. It's really quite slick. But guys, I just really want to summarize here what those key takeaways of this presentation really were, because we've really kind of covered a lot of ground here. And really, I wanted you to take away how the mind mapping methodology is a improved method of planning. The ability independently or collaboratively with multiple users to get ideas out in a nice visual way, see that big picture as well as the detail, and then continue to manipulate that information without having to rewrite it or move it around. It's very fluid all the time. We then explored how the mind map becomes your one-stop shop of all of your project assets. So the ability to add any type of attachments, pictures, text notes for the updates of the project or task descriptions. And then we really kind of got into that productivity element of the tool. So the ability to export that mind map into any Office document, including Google Docs, as we discussed, without having to replicate that information from scratch. But really looking at those the planning, project planning features of Mindview, the ability to jump into scheduling, resource management, budgeting, costing, baselining, and really down to some detailed information, constraint types, effort-driven tasks, and all those good things. But then at the back end of all of this, how even when you're at the delivery stage of your project, how the tool helps with stakeholder engagement, using the timeline tool, using the project project report export, or even just by using the mind map itself to filter on the relevant information, displaying it for the right purposes, and having that interaction with your users in a nice visual way. Again, all without having to replicate this information from scratch. Okay. Oh, so we've got a few questions here that I'm going to go through. Guys, look, I'm just going to put onto the screen here my contact details because I know some of you might want to jump off as we're jumping through questions. So it's liampettit@matchware.com. Oops. If you would like to get a copy of the slides, I believe they're going to be distributed anyway, but I can send you a whole bank of resources about, how to create the work breakdown structure, how to create the Gantt chart, also some useful video tutorials on how to do that. Also, continuous professional development that we offer, accredited courses around mind mapping and project planning itself. But let me just jump into these questions here and see if I can address most of these as possible. So, okay, so
slides will be sent to all. Yes, you're right, Liam. They would be sent to everybody. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Yes, so I said desktop. What about remote working with clients and uploading? So we have we've got functionality in the pipeline very soon, which we call it the Mindview Drive. So this functionality already exists, but it's kind of separate, and you'd have to purchase it separately. We're bringing it into the tool as a standard. We're talking very soon. So if you were actually to purchase Mindview today, you'd still get that feature very soon. And that Mindview Drive offers individuals to manage documents online, collaborate in live real time with multiple users, a bit like a Google Doc. So you see that mind map being edited in real time by multiple users. But if you're going to want to access the functionality of Mindview, then yes, you do need to download and install the desktop versions, the PC or the Mac. They're really very robust pieces of software. They've been developed over the kind of past 20 years. They pass with flying colors any tests that happen through IT departments, simply because we work with anyone from Ministry of Defense organizations, atomic agencies, through to local governments, and etc. So we have no challenges with passing that test. Some people, yeah, so the remote working element as well, if you're accessing it via VPN, some people access our software through that, but of course that has all the wonderful challenges perhaps of a bit of a laggy experience is all I'd say, but of course that's not the result of Mindview so much, that's obviously the VPN itself. Excellent. So I would say then, for those of you who are still on the line, I'd be really, it's just kind of some instant feedback to send me back on my way for the evening. I'm interested to know, has that been a value? Has that met your expectations? If it has, just press that hands up button again, kind of like a virtual high five, I suppose. You can all have a big high five for this session. Of course, in line with data protection, we don't have access to your data, me as a company I'm talking about. So if you do want to get more information, you do need to be proactive to get in contact with us. I see, Thierry. Thierry, Mindview Online works with tablets, but like I said, the Mindview Online document doesn't have the Gantt chart built into it or the timeline functionality at the moment, just because those are really big bits of functionality to host or to create as an online tool. But maybe in the future that's something we'll do. Cool. Everyone, you're very welcome. Well, Viva, I'm going to perhaps pass back to you for this final bit.
Right, okay. Thank you very much, Liam. It was very good for me, very comparable to Microsoft Project, but I can see quite a few extra features as well. I hope the audience, I hope the delegates, I hope you all enjoyed yourself and mind mapping presentation. As a way of thank you, BCS will be sending a book that Liam has selected. This is Business Relationship Manager by Ernest Brewster. And as Liam said, that mind mapping tool is available to test it out for 30 days without any charge. So you could take the advantage if you would like to have it for your organization. And as Maurice said earlier, that this is the last event for this year as we break for summer. The next event will start in September, and booking will be available by end of next month, I believe. We don't know the topic as yet. Surveys, another thing is a survey as usual are sent to you all after the event. I would like to ask you all to complete this survey and let us know what topics you would like in the future related to project and program management, so we can actually introduce some other presentations as well. I'm very happy with what Liam Petit has showed us today. It's a lot of details has gone into mind mapping tool, and it's been very educational for me. And I hope you find that quite educational as well. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Viva. Thank you for the invitation. I really appreciated it.